After more than a year of a devastating war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, with immense suffering on both sides, the deal could see the first round of hostages go free as early as Sunday and would see an initial 6-week ceasefire. Joining me in the studio now is Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, I24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran, and correspondent Nicole Zedek. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. Certainly an exciting moment, a lot of breaking news coming out. What do we know about the deal that is currently on the table and currently potentially just minutes or hours away from being announced?
Well, it looks like it's a multi-phase deal where the first phase will be 42 days, and during which time 33 of the hostages, some of whom will not be alive probably, will be released. Whereby if all the phases actually are implemented, and it's a big if, then this will be the end of the war, because Israel, as far as we know, is agreeing to pull the IDF out of Gaza and end the war. So I can think of two things to say. One is wonderful that this is happening at last. There will be jubilation in Israel, and I suspect in Gaza. But the other thing is, incredibly, 1 month after Netanyahu told the Wall Street Journal that he would never end the war leaving Hamas in power in Gaza, that is precisely what he's doing. And this is happening largely by Israel's design, because there was, I think, coast-to-coast agreement across planet Earth that this war needs to end, with Hamas no longer in power in Gaza, and only one entity stood in the way of that, as far as I can tell, other than perhaps Hamas itself, and that is the government of Israel.
Breaking news to our viewers here. I just heard in my ear that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has confirmed that a deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. We will continue to cover this and bring you the latest news. Dan, back to you in the studio. This deal, how is it being seen within Israel at this moment? Is it an opportune time for Israel, 5 days away from the Trump inauguration?
Yeah, look, polls have shown consistently that nearly 3/4 of Israelis wanted the deal to happen, understanding that it basically means that the second condition that Israel had set for ending the war way in the beginning, in addition to returning the hostages, which was removing Hamas from power in Gaza, would not be achieved probably. So Israelis, I think, are unhappy about that, but they still accept the deal because there is a sense that the hostages have been for too long not prioritized, and it is critical for the cohesion of society in Israel to do anything possible and to almost pay any price in order to bring them back. So there is, I think, joy, and there will be support for this deal. The recriminations about the context in which it was made will come down the line. As for Trump, there had been an expectation that Israel would not agree to a final deal before Trump enters office, because of a notion that Trump would remove all guardrails and enable Israel to put even more pressure on Hamas, maybe enable Israel to slow down humanitarian aid, and in short, to do more in Gaza. And therefore, I think many people in Israel are legitimately surprised that a final deal is being reached before Trump enters office. And of course, the reason for that appears to be that Trump sent his envoy Witkoff to Israel to make very clear to Netanyahu that there is nothing to wait for and that he needs to sign a deal. As far as I can tell, Trump is the reason why we have this deal present.
Some of these reports state that in one single sit-down meeting with the incoming Trump administration, more got done than the entire year and plus that we'd seen with the Biden administration. And so I think this does go to show not only the pressure that the Trump administration has on top of Netanyahu right now, but it also does show Netanyahu's wanting to abide and appease the incoming Trump administration. They want to see this growing relationship because there is the possibility for one of the most pro-Israel administrations to be coming into the White House, but that does not come without any caveats. And so this was the major caveat for the Trump administration to say, okay, look, we're going to support you on all of your future military endeavors. When it does come to this, we're not going to hold you back, as we continue to hear from many of Trump's envoy picks. However, this needs to happen before Trump is in office, and it seems like that pressure certainly worked.
Dan, you had an addition to this comment.
Yeah, it perhaps should come as no surprise. Nicole's absolutely right. There had been expectation that the pressure would be coming from Trump on Hamas by allowing Israel to escalate. But I always suspected that the Israeli right wing might be a little bit too optimistic in this regard, because Netanyahu had engineered a situation in the war that was leading to something close to permanent war, a nonstop guerrilla war against Hamas that enables Netanyahu politically to delay the accounting over October 7th and to keep his government together because the far right opposed an end to the war, because they have dreams of settling Gaza with Jews and so forth. Now, this is horribly cynical, but I think half of Israel believes that's what's happening. That is in a head-on collision with Trump that basically has been stating very clearly that he wants the Gaza war to end on day one. Similarly to his desire for the Ukraine war to end. So he's batting 500 now because it kind of looks like he was very serious about this and put the squeeze on Netanyahu to basically reorganize his priorities. And Netanyahu will now have to explain why he's violating his promise to leave Gaza with Hamas not in power. I suspect that the deal might fall apart in phases 2 and 3 because there is vagueness on whether indeed there's going to be talks on a day after. There's going to be talks on modalities of who supervises what movement to Palestinians, but it's very vague on a day after. If Netanyahu resumes his insistence that Hamas not be in charge while also maintaining his opposition to the Palestinian Authority being in charge, that catch-22 would prolong the war and probably bring the ceasefire deal crashing down.
I think Netanyahu is finding out exactly what some critics said was going to happen, that no matter, how many accomplishments Trump had and how much he put his neck out in terms of the first term of the U.S.-Israel relationship, the moving of the embassy, the assassination of Soleimani, the recognition of the sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the brokering of the Abraham Accords, we can go on and on. Some critics said eventually Trump will be Trump and he'll look out for himself rather than Israeli interest. And this may be that first occasion where we're seeing that, and that would not obviously bode so well for future Trump-Netanyahu engagements, so to speak, going forward.
All right, Mike Wagenheim, live with us from the State Department in Washington. Thank you very much. Now, Dan, while Mike was speaking here, you were nodding your head and you were showing that you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I agree with him, but I want to add that there is a strong element here of Israeli politics because the Likud party base, the right-wing Israel, sort of views Biden almost as a member of the Israeli opposition. Capitulation to Biden would have gone down very, very poorly. Acquiescence to Trump somehow can be spun as part of some strategic grand design because Trump will doubtless reward Israel, whether or not anything was actually promised. For example, a freer hand in expanding settlements in the West Bank. The government will imply that it was. And the people, the base at least, will sort of believe it. So basically, it was easier to accept the exact same thing from Trump that Biden had to work so hard for and basically failed for over a year to impose on Israel.
I will quickly add that while we are comparing this to the deal that Biden did first put forward back in May, we do have to realize that even if it is a similar outline of the deal, the entire Middle East arena has changed so much since then. Yahya Sinwar is no longer alive. The main leader of Hamas, all of the main leaders of Hamas, both inside Gaza and outside Gaza. How about Lebanon as well? The main leaders there. Iran is weaker than it has ever been. And so there's so much more at stake here also that has truly, I think, led to this, along with this pressure coming from the Trump administration. And so even though it might be a similar, if not the same deal, the entire region has changed, and that could have also catapulted this acceptance by Israel right now to finally accept the terms of the deal.
Just yesterday, far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir spoke out vehemently against the deal and even said that he'd managed to derail a deal many times in the past. So what can we expect to see now in the next coming days, and how could this deal affect the government, and more specifically, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Here in the studio, still with me, Dan Perry, Ariel Osran, and Nicole Zedek. Dan, what are we hearing now from the halls of power, and what are we going to see in the next few days?
Well, the two right-wing boogeymen in the coalition, the Finance Minister Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, are both opposed to the deal. They wanted, indeed, the same forever war that I was saying earlier today that Netanyahu appears to have given them. They don't want the war to end. They want to resettle Gaza with Jews. So they're going to oppose it. Smotrich himself called it a national security catastrophe for Israel, no less. But will they bring down the government? Theoretically, both of them combined, if their people will go with them, do have the ability to bring down the government. But that would trigger elections probably. And all the polls showed that the right wing as a whole would lose such elections. And I think the prospect of being in opposition might focus the minds of politicians to an extent to such an extent that they actually are willing to have their bluff be called. They'll vote against it. I'd be surprised if they bring down the government.
I don't think this is the last word has been said regarding the PA's involvement in post-war Gaza. And again, we have not even begun implementing the first phase of the deal, when on day 16, they're expected to only begin specific negotiations for phase 2 and the day after. So we are still a long ways ahead from really determining who will administer post-war Gaza.
All right, and joining now the discussion is Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, a Gazan writer, analyst, and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We heard the Prime Minister of the PA. We heard Israel pushing back. If not the PA, if not the Hamas, what do Gazans see as a possible or welcome leadership for the Strip after this war?
Thanks for having me. This is the million-dollar question. On the one hand, the Palestinian Authority is a necessary framework financially. From a legal point of view, it enjoys international recognition and access to frameworks that can enable the funneling of funds and resources for the reconstruction of Gaza. On the other hand, the Palestinian Authority lacks the infrastructure in the Gaza Strip to be able to credibly come in there and assume responsibility in a way that displaces Hamas's 17 or 18-year grip on power. I will also add, people in Gaza, after years of subjugation under Hamas's rule, they are in fact ready for the Palestinian Authority to assume responsibility. They are in fact eager for somebody other than Hamas to be a part of the reconstruction and recovery and building state institutions and nation building. And I don't know how much of that is love for the Palestinian Authority as much as it is just a desperate desire for an alternative to Hamas's Islamism, to being aid dependent subjects who are relying on UNRWA and the NGO industrial complex that has proliferated since Hamas took over.
Right.
And so there really is this conundrum, once again, of people remember the corruption of the Palestinian Authority, but they would sometimes tell you, we would much rather that over endless wars and cycles of violence that get us destroyed, that squander billions of dollars of our people's resources. Should we want to see a shift, that will have to be, there will have to be a political decision in Israel to allow for some creative, new, fresh, out-of-the-box thinking.
We're sitting here after months and months of reporting, maybe a ceasefire is coming, maybe a hostage deal. Now it seems that this is the moment. What is the main takeaway from the viewer back home, for the viewer back home sitting here and hearing that, oh, there's going to be a ceasefire and a hostages deal, and it might kick in as soon as this evening?
Well, with the caveat that we don't know if it'll actually work and reach its full conclusion, it does appear as if Israel has agreed to end the war and pull out of Gaza in exchange for the hostages, and also to release many prisoners, some of whom are very heavy-duty terrorists. This will be basically treated with great joy in Israel, where most people want an end to the war. But I have to just remind everyone there's a huge missed opportunity here strategically. The Biden administration has been trying to somehow engineer an end to the war where Hamas is no longer in charge in Gaza, and Israel might even somehow, as part of agreeing to end the war, receive normalization with Saudi Arabia and a large military alliance with the US and maybe NATO and all the moderate Arab Sunni countries arrayed against Iran. Israel should have grabbed that and made that a condition of ending the war. Instead, now, under pressure, it ends the war, receives none of those things, and leaves Hamas in power in Gaza. And throughout this time, much of the reason for this has been that Israel doesn't want to empower the Palestinian Authority because it finds, not Israel, the right-wing government of Israel, finds there to be some benefit in having Gaza and West Bank be divided and having, indeed, Hamas be in charge in the Gaza Strip and not the West Bank. Whatever benefit might attach to that for Israel is so outweighed by what Israel has given up in order to do it this way. It's so mind-bendingly unintelligent for this to have happened that I take some comfort in what Trump says, that he will work to not have Gaza be a terrorist state again. Maybe that means that somehow there will be great pressure in the second and third stage of this deal to fix it and to basically come up with an arrangement, and if need be, force Netanyahu's hand to accept that arrangement, where a revitalized version of the Palestinian Authority, with help from perhaps even foreign troops, Arab troops, there are many models being discussed, might take over in Gaza, and we don't end up with Hamas in charge in Gaza, which, by the way, is a missed opportunity for the Gazans as well.
Right.
I strongly doubt they want to continue being ruled by Hamas.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. That's all for this edition of Middle East Now.